I have been very much enjoying your interviews, but I like your beginning piece, your beginning essay. And maybe it's just my media consumption, but were you at all influenced by Sam Harris's style? Because you have a similar cadence.
So my inspiration for the opening part comes from many of the talks I do, where in the question and answer portion, people get very engaged. Mm-hmm. And in that portion of a talk, I don't have notes. I just respond to what the person asked me. And so what I try to do is imagine a question that somebody has asked, and then I try to answer it. And it's been very difficult for me. I'm learning as I go, because while I have no stage fright at all, if you put me in front of 2,000 people with 5 minutes notice and no notes, I'm cool, not a problem. But you have that camera staring at me in an empty room, and I'm just very nervous. So you will hear, if you listen in episode 1, you will hear a lot of nervousness. In episode 2, you'll still hear a considerable amount of nervousness. In episode 3, which we'll post tomorrow, I hope there will be less nervousness. Maybe 5 or 6. I'm hoping the nervousness will be gone. But that's what I try to do. I imagine a question, and then I try to answer it.
And you don't work from notes as a tactic? You think notes would be a crutch? Why not have some notes?
I don't work from notes because if I have any notes, I will use them and then I get stilted.
Yeah.
There are a few occasions when I speak, I either speak if it's if it's a situation where I want to make sure that there is no possibility of being misunderstood and no possibility of saying anything wrong, I will speak from a written text. I do that on occasion, in the right kind of circumstances. And then the price I pay, or the price that is paid for a text that has no missteps, is that it does sound a little stilted, a little stagey. When I talk to groups, I usually talk with only the scantiest notes, 3 or 4 lines. Which are memorized, and I will think in my head topic ABC, and that's what I'm doing. But where I get most engagement with live audiences is when I have no notes at all. Someone asks a question and I answer it.
Do you find the best public speakers who are speech deliverers also frequently are excellent extemporaneous speakers, or are they two really different skill sets?
Yeah, I don't think there are rules about this. There are a lot of ways of doing it. One of the dumbest lines in literature is that line from Tolstoy about all happy families being happy in the same way.
Yeah.
Not true at all, and violated every day by observation. So there are a lot of ways to do things well, and you have to work with the way that suits your character, your limits, your strengths, so I'm conscious. I can be stilted if I am over prepared, and so I want to, especially in the podcast format, be as direct and immediate as possible.
I think that Tolstoy line belongs in a collection of similar lines that are very useful because they are untrue.
Right.
And Tolstoy said it, but they're trotted out for the sake of rebutting them rhetorically. I'll give you another example. There are no second acts in American life. I would say 95% of the time that line is cited. It's to document that there are many second acts and third and fourth in American life. It's what America's all about.
But a great Fitzgerald scholar told me that one of the reasons we abuse that line is because we don't understand it.
Yes.
When you hear it said there's no second acts, what we think that means is there are no comebacks. Mm-hmm. And so obviously that's true. What Fitzgerald meant when he wrote it was, according to this expert, was in those days the drama was presented in 3-act plays. First is the act where the cat goes up the tree. The third act is the act where the cat comes down in the tree. And the second act is the act where the cat is stuck in the tree.
Yeah.
And what Fitzgerald said is in American lives, meaning his life, that middle part is so he went from a career of being meteoric prodigy to washed up drunk. And he never felt like he had the interval in which to develop his character the way he would have wished to develop it.
Yeah.
So what he meant to say, and you can argue about whether this is true, is not there are no comebacks, but American life doesn't give you time to develop your character as you should. And again, your objection raises, it's still a crass generalization from his complaint about his own life.
For a man who died at 43, 44 with $13 in royalties from The Great Gatsby, you could see why he would be of that opinion. Then again, in The Great Gatsby, Gatsby rebuts the idea that you can't go back to the past. Dear boy, of course you can.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's also true. All right, that wasn't even the interview. That was just some things on craft I wanted to ask you. Here's the interview. David Frum joins me now. He is a staff writer for The Atlantic and really the perfect person to host the David Frum Show, a new podcast, which I've been listening to, and it is, as typical of Mr. Frum's work, quite excellent. Welcome. I believe this is true. Welcome back to The Gist, David.
I'm not sure if I've been on it. It was so long ago. And I feel like when we talk about podcasts, I mean, you sort of invented it. So
I did invent podcasting, yes. They should be called Pesca casts.
They really should. And so the rest of us are like, following in the footsteps and basically we owe you all royalties for your idea.
Tell me about the Frum cast, which was blessedly the name you avoided.
Yes.
What did you want to do with it? Because you do address this in episode 1, but I think it's important for my listeners to hear it.
Yeah, I have been a guest on a lot of podcasts. I have, for a long time, avoided. I felt like I was the last person who didn't do it. But in this second Trump period, I felt I had to do something different from what I'd done in Trump 1. Partly for personal reasons, I wanted to do some self-reinvention. So the idea of the show is I want to speak to the middle ground of American politics. I think that the culminating thing was I had seen this chart that showed the podcast landscape, or at least the political podcast landscape, piling up on the fringes, and I think most Americans believe in markets, believe in the independence of the central bank, believe in free trade, believe there should be a social safety net, believe that you should take medical advice from scientists and not from morons, and basically want to get along in reasonable harmony with people who are a little different from themselves. And so where is that? So I'm trying to model on the show the way I think I'd like to see the politics of the future. We cover sort of the center ground of American life. And I try to, I'm not trying for viral, exciting moments. I'm trying to create something where at the end of it, not only will you feel better informed, but you actually will be better informed.
There is a market for that nutrition. I mean, it's not just broccoli. It sticks to the soul if it's very satisfying. But I do wonder I think that presenting it that way is wise. And I think you're right. There is a market niche, and places like Tangle and other places. I try to do that, but they've been very successful. Others on the fringes, from Midas Touch to Dan Bongino, have been more successful. Yeah. But I do wonder if, without the element of, I did this podcast because I desperately have something to say, if a correct assessment of the market is the proper driving force for a podcast.
Yeah. Well, I do have something to say. And I mean, I'm there talking about, call me an oddball. And you know what? I'm an oddball. But through my life, I've been obsessed with issues of trade and tariffs. I grew up in Canada, so it comes maybe naturally. So to see the United States government attacking the system of global commerce that's been built, that has done so much good for not only prosperity, but peace and security, to see the NATO system. I mean, Christopher Hitchens, my late friend, said after 9/11 that everything he loved had come under attack from everything he hated. And I think in this, even more in the second Trump term than in the first, I feel very much the same way. My father was born in Toronto in 1931. His family came to Canada from Poland in 1930. They were not refugees. They came for economic reasons. Had they stayed, they would have been murdered. My father would have been murdered by the time he was 11 or 12, as were every one of their relatives who stayed behind. So I grew up in this extraordinary period of peace and prosperity and security after the Second World War, none of it owing anything to my efforts. But I at least paid back by making the effort to understand how it had been built and to honor the people who'd done it. And then I watched this bunch of vandals just smash it to pieces without even understanding what it is, just because they're bored and malicious. So NATO, free trade, all the systems that keep the democratic world together. It's all on the firing line now, and that's my fight.
Were you among those who correctly assessed the Trump's tariff stance as being backwards and unhelpful, but thought that it might mostly be bluster, or did you know he was going to adhere to it to the extent he has?
to the extent he has, I mean, it's hard to imagine anything so malicious and stupid. But I did know it was true and not because I'm so prophetic, but because he did it before. People forget this. But in Trump 1, Trump began applying tariffs in the second half of 2018, not only against China, but against trading partners like Canada and the European Union, steel and aluminum tariffs. And there was a market crisis in the second half of 2018. The second half of 2018 saw a big fall in stock markets. Trump backed off a little bit in 2019, and then it was all overtaken by COVID.
Right.
One of the reasons that his COVID response was so bad, and again, people forget this, they used to know it. So Trump became very worried about how the stock market was doing in the run-up to the 2020 election. He began to plead with the Chinese for a trade deal. And that's why there are all these flattering tweets from him to the Chinese dictator Xi. You're so great, you're so wonderful. Please give me a face-saving exit from the trade war I started. And it was because he was so busy enticing Xi into a trade deal that he ignored all the early signs of COVID. And I think I did this on Twitter the other day. I'm going to write it up someday. You do the timeline, and you can see that he is working. For him, in December 2019, January 2020, even into February 2020, getting the deal is top priority. And so he is flattering Xi and ignoring COVID in the crucial months that determined whether this would be a gigantic crisis or whether it might be contained.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why he was so quick to call it the China virus, well, he doesn't, let's just say quite generously to him, he doesn't mind doing a toe touch into offensive racism, but he felt burned by Xi. He was very angry that Xi didn't do the deal beforehand.
Yeah. Well, look, viruses have often been named from the places where they originated. There was a Hong Kong flu in the 50s. There was in the 1890s. There was a Russian flu, and viruses they have life cycles. I mean, the misnamed Spanish flu, in fact, originated in the United States,
Kansas, right?
In Kansas, exactly. Yeah. And then they because viruses are constantly evolving. So
just ask Ebola.
Just ask Ebola. But what Trump was also trying to do at that point was he had messed up pretty badly, and for very selfish reasons. He's a very classic Trump. He got himself into a fight he didn't understand. He was losing. He had no public support behind him. He began to look desperately for an exit. He began to think he was owed an exit. If he didn't get the exit, it was the fault of the people with whom he'd started the fight for not giving him the exit. And so therefore they were to blame. And then he has this echo chamber of, as you say, borderline racist or sometimes past the borderline, this amplifying chamber. But here we are now. This is a trade war not against China, but against the whole world.
So you mentioned that you wanted to do something different than you were doing in the first administration. And I read you and you were a valuable voice. And you also pivoted away from your previous tribe, which takes a lot and probably has a lot of cost. Now, maybe many members of the previous tribe have joined you. But what I could imagine wanting to do things different for a few reasons. One, it wasn't working. Two, you've already been there. Three, you saw this new market opportunity. But what were the things that you were doing that for whatever reason you didn't think were as effective or you didn't want to keep doing in terms of, you're not changing your deep convictions about the danger of the Trump administration. I assume you mean just how you express that.
Well, a fully candid answer to this has to be a little personal and a little heavy. So forgive me. I'm debating whether or not to do it, but what the hell?
Yeah.
All right. So in Trump 1, I did a lot of rapid reaction pieces. So Trump would do something heinous. I would write about it for The Atlantic, and it would have a lot of response. And The Atlantic became really a powerful voice, and very much from the center. I mean, because many of my pieces were attacking him not just for his dictatorial efforts, but you mentioned tribe. I mean, I'm a market guy, and I would attack him for his attacks on free market, for his attacks on trade, for his attacks on property rights, for his attacks not only on the due process that is expected before you send somebody to a concentration camp, but the due process before you say to a law firm you can't do business with the government. I was interested in all of those things. It was very tiring. And at the end of the first Trump presidency, I thought, you know what, I'm now going to go back to longer form journalism. I wrote about issues of art and art history and museums. And then early in 2024, we had a devastating personal event in my family. My wife and I lost our eldest child. And I was in a state of kind of emotional and mental paralysis. And then, and I convinced myself that Trump wasn't coming back because I could not, as a diminished person, I couldn't work and live the way I had worked and lived from 2017 to 2021. And then Trump did come back, and I feared he would. I kept insisting as a prediction that he wouldn't, but that was holding my own hand because I couldn't deal with it if he did. He did. And then I had to find some way to, with a lot less strength than I used to have and a lot less joy in life than I used to have, I had to find some way to meet for the balance of my life, or the balance of my energy, meet my responsibilities. And so I've been looking for different ways to do it. But this is very much about, there's just less of me to go around than there used to be.
When I read your earlier pieces, they sometimes, I think, unfairly got lumped in the category of resistance journalism. And yeah, the people who were resisting Trump often loved those pieces. Then again, you would often get attacked from the left. Yeah. But what do we do with the idea that Trump should be resisted? Yeah. And what should we do with the fact that, here's another one. I was just reading in Axios, Sarah Fisher, excellent journalist. She was documenting how the concern about misinformation and disinformation has abated. And my personal take on this is that we exaggerated the concern, and yet we should be concerned. It was a big concern, and people would reach, and yet at the same time, people would reach for it wantonly. So how do you, and I suppose this also informs what you're doing now, but how do you take into effect that there are elements of what you're doing that are simultaneously righteous and perhaps can be derided as predictable or having no effect on the actual comportment of the administration of the world?
My son, who is a great sports fan, once gave me a very valuable piece of advice, borrowed from the world of sports. He said the advice they give players is don't let the audience into the game. Mm-hmm. So you just do the game the way you think it needs to be done. Of course, it is bad always to be overstated, exaggerated, and I never liked the term capital R resistance because it not only because it was exaggerated, it misunderstood the nature of the threat. I said through the first time, I said over and over again, hundreds of times a year, there are many stops on the train line of bad before you get to Hitler Station. The United States is a backsliding democracy. But it remains a democracy, and the tools of democracy are there. That's one of my answers to people who say, why aren't people in the streets? So long as elections are possible, going into the streets is a waste of time and effort, because the time you spend organizing a rally could be spent mobilizing people to vote. Yeah. So long as that's...
And by the way, a couple of weeks ago, they were in the streets, and there's a lot of downside. What you just said, oftentimes these rallies, these organizations get overtaken by views that aren't those of the organized. So yes, please.
That's inevitable because rallies get taken over by the people who are good at rallies. Yeah. And the people who are good at rallies are people who are protesting all the time. Whereas the anti-Trump movement needs to be a movement of people who mostly go about their business, mostly vote, mostly take part in regular politics, are not experienced with demonstration. So of course they will be out-organized. And then there will be all kinds of dangerous and counterproductive symbols. So until you get to the Serbia situation, the Hungarian situation, where voting is useless, or prevented from being useful, the energy needs to go into ordinary politics. But it is a backsliding democracy. It is an open question whether the elections of 26 and 28 will be fully free and fair. I don't say they won't be, but I worry about it. So, but of course, as a writer, the power of writing is always from saying exactly the thing that needs to be said and not more. And you don't get, I used to write speeches and for a president, and people would often stop me and look around, and they'd give me a draft of a speech they'd written. And you'd open, I don't mean to make fun, but you'd read the speech and it'd be full of, nor I would, never shall it be, let them not pass. and you read this and you think, do they know they've invented the microphone?
Not everything is Winston Churchill on the eve of World War II also. Right. There are big stakes, but we're not all trying to flee a besieged French city at this exact moment. Yes, exactly.
So tone it down. So it's always, the key to good writing is always tone it down. I mean, whatever you're writing, basic rule, take out first, go through, kill every adverb, everyone. And then kill about half the adjectives. And the survivors, take them down, always a notch. And every verb, take it down. You will be surprised because if the matter is strong, the style doesn't have to be. So don't oversell it. I think that's just always true of effective writing. And with the Trump, you need to take on board the nature of the danger, which is, again, to quote something I said during Trump 1, he's not the heart attack of democracy. He's the gum disease of democracy. And the way you deal with it's a constant.
The ginger hair gingivitis.
Yeah, it's this decay and deterioration, and it's not going to be one final battle like in that old socialist anthem. It's just an endless struggle of every day there's some new act of crookedness or craziness or cowardice. And so if you sell people that there's this giant moment, you in a way deprive them of the patience they need for what is going to be a grinding struggle. And it may not end in Trump 1. You could hope if Trump just left the scene, we could go back to something more familiar. Trump has now pulled a great political party after him into the cause, into the idea that, you know what the things we value most cannot be achieved by democratic means. And therefore, we have to abandon democratic means. And again, that doesn't mean SS uniforms. The models, it means this corruption and corrosion of democratic self-government. It means breaking down restraints on the power of the authorities. One of the things I worry most about with these seizures of people from the streets of America and sending them without hearings to camps. Obviously, the condition of those people is terrible, and many of them, even the ones who are guilty of heinous things, are still owed a hearing before being sent to a prison. And for all we know, and it looks possible, many of them are guilty of nothing serious other than overstaying a visa. And you don't send somebody to a prison for life with no contact with the outside world for visa overstay. But I worry as much, maybe even more, that we've constructed a bureaucracy of people who are getting good at finding ways and means and reasons to send people to prisons without a hearing. And that we're building a government apparatus that will grow and that will affect more and more people. And that's, again, it's gingivitis. It's not heart attack.
Yeah. And this fits in exactly with something I said often during the first administration, that our deliverance will be professionals doing our job. And I wasn't blasé about it. I just thought we had a very robust, say, judiciary. And Tim Wu wrote an op-ed in the New York Times essentially afterwards saying this is what happened, which isn't to denigrate people in the street and everyone who certainly voted against him. But we do have this robust bureaucracy with people who are serious about their jobs and have power. Now, the question is, in this administration, again, not being blasé, I'm not quite as confident. I still have the inclination that will come to pass. But exactly what you said, they are thinking about and going through efforts to more systematically and less randomly pursue their agenda. And they are going about efforts to make it less the case that the people doing their job in the federal apparatus are aligned with, aligned with the side of actual justice.
Well, I would have agreed rather more with that statement in the first Trump term than in the second. Yeah. So judiciary and bureaucracy. So the federal judiciary has made it quite clear they do not want to tangle with Trump. And they're saying, don't look to us. And through the interval between Trump 1 and Trump 2, when he was faced all those charges, the pretty obvious wish of the judiciary was to be let out. Every form of delay they accepted. That Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida, her colleagues could have overruled her if they were really upset with what she was doing. She does answer to an appellate circuit, and they have ways of disciplining her, including reassigning the case. I don't think they were displeased to say, just push this. We are hoping he'll lose in 2024. Just push these matters over the edge. Keep this away from us. We are not here to save you. And that's what John Roberts did in that bizarre opinion on presidential criminal immunity, impunity. He came up with, he mostly wanted to say, keep him out of my court. So I'm going to come up with this completely convoluted doctrine based on nothing. The bottom line of which is, I don't want to see him in my court.
Yeah.
And not because I love him so much, because I don't, but just because I don't want to stick my neck out. So
I think the Abrego Garcia ruling adheres to that too.
Yeah,
trying to sidestep with words like facilitate.
Right. So I think, with the Garcia thing, there's some things that are so heinous and so egregious they have to say something. But mostly, I would not count on them to be heroes.
What about Boasberg?
These are district court judges. You have to think about this as a system. How does the system? So there will be always for every canon there'll be a Boasberg, but the system as a whole, its instinct is pretty obviously we accept and even welcome delay. That's what we want. The bureaucracy in Trump 1, Trump didn't understand how the bureaucracy worked. He thought he could give orders, and even though they were illegal or impossible, that they would somehow be executed. In this time, and this is the real danger this time, he has got many more like-minded people at high levels who are working with him to turn off the bureaucracy. And a lot of things are happening, for example, in the tariff realm, but also, at another time, if a president proposed, what I want to do is seize people on American streets, put a bag over their head, bundle them onto a plane, fly them to a foreign country, and send them to prison for life without ever there being a hearing. There might have been some resignations. There might have been some protests. There might have been some delay inside the bureaucracy. This time, the analogy that's used that I like best is that the velociraptors have learned to operate the doorknobs, that Trump knows better and who to trust. And the people he knows to trust know better how to operate the bureaucracy. So again, without saying where this is like Hitler's 100 days in office, because it's not like that at all, we are on a dangerous path and it's going bad. And we're also in this period where the American economy, we're like the cartoon character, we're off the edge of the cliff, we're clutching the anvil, we haven't yet begun the plunge, but the plunge is about to happen. Yeah,
don't look down. That seems to be the triggering mechanism for gravity taking place. But let me ask you, so you criticize the federal judiciary, I think aptly, but how can you discern what the difference is between timidity, which should be called out, and a reasonable fear of overreach? Because of what you just said as a columnist, you would often face criticism for not going far enough, but you just said you don't want to go too far because then you ruin your credibility. Yeah. Maybe a judge, if they were sitting here, would be saying just that. You don't want to overreach. You don't want to overrule Eileen Cannon. Yeah, the vast majority of this circuit wouldn't have ruled that way, but there are consequences, and we're really talking about a document storage case that would probably result in a fine.
Yes. No, there are. That's very true. I think the real and they have faced a real problem, which is the question of, is a president criminally liable for acts? Is a question that managed not to arise from the presidency of George Washington to the presidency of Barack Obama. And in fact, there's and the courts have been in the past, they've said, presidents are not liable. They don't have civil liability for their official acts. That's the case from the Nixon days. In the Clinton days, there's a case that says they do have civil liability for their non-official acts. So you sexually harass somebody before you become president. Yes, she can go ahead with a lawsuit against you, even if you are president. But the whole criminal realm, they left alone. And it is a heavy thing to ask. And I understand why they were reluctant. But the crime here is not drunk driving. The crime here is an attempt to overthrow the Constitution of the United States by violence. And if the judicial system says the laws cannot deal with an attempt to overthrow the Constitution by violence, well, then what recourse do we have? At that point, we're out of the realm of law altogether and into the realm of very dangerous kinds of politics where there's suddenly no rules.
So on my show, I have said the most meaningful, powerful aphorism in the last 10 years was one of your coinage: if liberals won't enforce borders, fascists will. Yeah. And I say it goes way beyond borders, though we're absolutely seeing that with the immigration issue. You could apply it to most of the big issues in America. If liberals won't keep our cities safe, fascists will. If liberals won't rein in universities, fascists will. I don't want to go too far and say if liberals won't decide who gets to play in girls' sports, fascists will. But, and I don't want to catastrophize and call all of these other decisions that of fascists, but it is true, isn't it? You stopped at immigration, which is something you've talked about a long time, but it applies to so much.
I think, look, there's a balance in politics. What voters want to know is that liberals can say no and conservatives can say yes. And one of the things that George W. Bush, who's not everybody's favorite president these days, but one of the things he always wanted to do is to model that you can be a conservative president, but you can say yes to human needs of various kinds, and you can demonstrate that those feelings of empathy and sympathy and human understanding, they're not alien. Those are not alien emotions to you. And maybe you are less likely to say yes than your liberal counterparts, but you can still say yes sometimes. And liberals it's the same thing. They need to be able to say, we can say no, that we will probably send fewer people to prison than our conservative counterparts. And we'll make you a case why that's right and why our more lenient approach is the best one, both for justice and safety over the long term. That's their argument. But we can still send people to prison. And we do think that if you steal shampoo, that you have to be stopped. We can't decriminalize, can't shampoo theft, or soon there will be no shampoo in the stores, which is what happened in some of the big cities. I think of that moment where Kamala Harris got that ACLU questionnaire about sex changes at taxpayer expense for illegal aliens and federal prisoners. They took like 4 Newt Gingrich pain points. Literally 4. And they rolled and I thought the inability to say, is this a joke? If you're the candidate, is this a scam? Sex changes and illegal aliens and federal prisoners and taxpayer expense all in one question? Can I have any 2 of those? Can I?
Right. But also it makes it an easy question. You could just object to one part of it and say no, but she didn't.
No, what you say is this a joke? Yes. That's what you say. You don't answer the question. You say, so is there going to be a copay or does the taxpayer pick it up from the first dollar? It's just ridiculous. What are you trying to do to me? Why are you putting me in this position? You're supposed to be my friends. If you don't have the self-discipline to say, we're not playing politics this way, I have the self-control to say we're not playing politics this way.
Okay. Totally agree. And I think that there is a inability among liberals or progressives, and it may be because of their motivations, to even recognize that they ever did anything wrong. And there's these raft of excuses. Oh, you described positions that not many of us had or not all of us had. Let's put that aside for a second. I think that what I've been seeing is that very progressive people will say, I'm not going to stop advocating for causes that I think are righteous, full stop. I'm not going to read the electorate and try to triangulate, and that actually offends my sensibilities, offends my core, my convictions. So when it's on something like trans kids in sports, which I do think is a tiny, tiny, tiny issue, but it's clear where the public is, that you should moderate a bit. And yet when I think it's on something like the detention of Abrego Garcia, I'll concede. I'm looking at the stats now. It looks like America is not on my side. Would you tell a liberal, yes, this is as Gavin Newsom is saying, here's another issue where you should dim your light and not take a stand on principle because of the idea of what we've been talking about, not going too far in the minds of voters? Or for some reason, is this an issue where you should take a stand? And is the difference just that's where David Frum and Mike Pesca, that's where our convictions are, as opposed to a more progressive person who has these kind of convictions on a whole lot of issues?
Well, I'm not a liberal. I didn't grow up in the house of liberalism. And in a way, it's not really my job or my place to give advice to liberals, and progressives even less.
I'm even talking about anyone who just has a deep sense of conviction and doesn't want to violate that for quote unquote politics.
Look, those things are the question is, what is the conviction? But I just want to say something, because I this is an alley that where I am not the best guide down this alley. And what I would say about these particular alleys, I am, having said all the things I said about Harris and that silly ACLU questionnaire, those are not the people I'm really mad at as a person for where America is in 2025. The people I am most angry at, and this is because of the house I did grow up in, the house of conservatism. I'm mad at those people in my world who said, as I would agree, we need business to be moderately regulated. We need taxes that are low and predictable. And therefore, I am going to refuse to see the dangers of the destruction of democracy, the destruction of the world trading system. So I'm going to let someone else do how to balance the liberal progressive thing. And so where my energy is going is to my house, to say a lot of people made very sure, who are broadly at least came from the same place that I came from, are willing to betray the most important things in public life, the most indispensable. in order to save a point or two on their taxes. And they're not even going to get that because the damage to wealth that has been done by Trump is going to so offset the gains to income if Trump does go ahead with the tax cut. And by the way, if he does go ahead, the market is telling him the interest rates, the long-term interest rates are going to punish him. So we're not even going to be better off from this tax cut if it happens, which is going to anyway be gobbled up by his permission to tax cheat. A lot of my energy is about my house, not somebody else's house.
I've read you, and you're definitely someone who has spent a career believing in free markets and lowish predictable taxes and all these things all these planks that were core to conservatism in the Republican Party. But I've read you and I know that you recognized the allure of populism and Trump's tactics as a liar. But what has surprised you about what just standard conservatives or the party have been so eager, willing, and it's not a problem to jettison? Where you look and say, I just thought that this whole movement where everyone would look to the left and look to the right, we'd all agree or not even have to agree on these things, these have been thrown overboard. What are the surprising things?
Well, the biggest surprise, I'm not surprised by lack of principle. Human beings are not always heroes. I've been surprised by the lack of petty peevishness and vindictiveness. Like, if I were, say, Mitch McConnell, and Trump had said the things about my wife that he said about Mitch McConnell's wife, and I had a vote at an impeachment hearing, I mean, I would invoke lofty principles in my speech, but when I cast the vote, I'd be thinking, this is for Mrs. McConnell. Mm-hmm. Boom, thumbs down. I had an experience where I was on, early in 2017, I was on like a cable show at 11 o'clock. And at 11 o'clock in the morning. And so like no one's watching. So you think you can say anything. Like you say, Mr. Frum, what do you think about the reconciliation bill? I said, before I begin, I want to say an apology to the O.J. Simpson and his family. For years, I've been letting you carry the burden of guilt. I can't go on. And no one would know. You can confess that. So I said something disobliging at 11 a.m. on cable TV about an important Republican senator. And guess who was watching? That important Republican senator. So I come off the set and my phone rings, hold please for Senator so-and-so. And I take the call from Senator so-and-so and he reams me out. And I'm so flabbergasted that anyone has watched this, let alone a United States senator. So when he says his piece, I said, okay. Maybe I went too far. But, he's done all of these terrible things to you personally. He's demeaned you and belittled you and insulted you. Isn't there any part of you that wants to do something about that? And the senator explained why he couldn't. And then I said, well, couldn't you do this? And he explained why that wouldn't work. And I gave him another thing and he explained why that wouldn't work. And I said, okay, you win. I don't know what a senator can do and can't do as well as you do. But if I were a United States senator and a president had done this to me, I'd make him pay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what we say, what is the biggest surprise? They don't do that.
Honor. A little more of the honor culture kicking in. Yeah. A little more vindictiveness, a little less willingness to take being kicked in the teeth and having your wife insulted, which has happened to not just one. We could name several senators where Donald Trump has insulted their wives. I guess this is a good point. You would have thought they'd care more.
Yeah, you would.
This is a good point.
And you would think right now, so there are all these senators who have been insulted and demeaned, and they're watching the leader of their party drive off the economy off a cliff to the point where if there are free and fair elections in 2026, we're looking at a Republican wipeout on a 1982 or maybe even a 1974 scale. Mm-hmm. So just to keep your majorities, just to keep your seat, you want to wrest the steering wheel from this man's hands before it's too late. And by the way, you hate him. You hate him more than anybody does because you know him better. Donald Trump is one of those people. I mean, you can hate him from a distance, but to really hate him, I mean, look at how his wife feels about him. Yeah. You have to be really intimate with him to dislike him as much as he deserves. So why don't they do something? And they're just so broken, and I don't get it. I can't imagine being that inwardly defeated.
Well, I guess a part of it is that there are no clear examples to point to of someone who's done that and survived politically, which is the only way they value.
You don't have to survive.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? If you have a great exit strategy, maybe you could do it, but you are exiting Republican politics.
Look, this is Larry David, funny column aside. This is not the Third Reich. If you're a former U.S. senator, I promise you, there's a future for you. You're not going to a camp. You can be a university president. You've probably got plenty of money. You have many business opportunities. You don't have to be a U.S. senator for anything.
Podcasting, huh?
Podcasting. But so the Prussian king Frederick the Great used to, when his army was in danger of retreat, he would ride along the lines and shout at his soldiers, "Forward, you sons of bitches! Do you want to live forever?" Like you're a United States senator, you're not going to. I guarantee you're not going to be a United States senator forever. So think of a good day to take the risk, and then hold this person to account. I mean, I understand when Senator Lisa Murkowski, whom I have a lot of time for, said, "I am afraid." I thought that was a powerful message to send to America, that senators feel fear. But if that's true, if that's a true statement of your feelings, it's not a very worthy sentiment. Your duty should trump your fear. Your fear should not trump your duties. Your duty should trump your fear. And if you lose your seat, you lose your seat. And if something else bad happens too, I can just promise you from experience, there are things out there that are so bad that they make anything that's going to happen to you insignificant. So just do your job. Think about your place in history. Think about Mrs. McConnell.
Elaine Chao, former cabinet secretary. Last question. This is just out of curiosity, but as someone with the principles that you articulated and a Canadian, what's your take, not your analysis of why the Conservatives have cratered? It's a reaction to Trump, but who would you vote for in the Canadian elections? Are you still a conservative in Canada context?
Well, there's so much to say about this. In a way, as Americans watch Canadian politics, it's a throwback to American politics of a long time ago. The Conservatives were 22 points ahead. They're now 5 points behind. Can you imagine a 27-point swing in an American election? Because you'd
have to misanswer a lot of ACLU surveys to get that.
It's just because people can go anywhere. That the Conservatives had a series of answers to the problems of the fall of 2024. Stagnant productivity growth, high home prices, and the general weariness with the pretty feeble government of Justin Trudeau. Then comes this new thing where there's an American president who's talking about annexing Canada. And to scramble, there was a test of how quick can you move? And it's hard for a party to move fast. They had this whole strategy that was ready for one question, and then the question was changed. And so it looks like there will be a big Liberal win. They're not my cup of tea at all. I worry a lot that Canada will respond to Trump by becoming more statist, more inward-looking, more protectionist, all the things that characterized Canadian government when I came on the scene and that I spent a lot of time and energy fighting against. But this is a long and more specific conversation, how Canada should respond. The problem is the whole world is in the same boat. Trump has created a situation where he's in this geopolitical, geoeconomic crisis he started with China. He's ensured that America has no friends except for his jailers in El Salvador, whom he pays to be his friends.
David Frum is a former presidential speechwriter, a staff writer for The Atlantic, and now the host of The David Frum Show. Listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a great pleasure to be with you today.